Hi everyone, now we're going to put the bias binding around the neck edge of your little bodice top. So first things first, you need to work out how much of the bias binding tape you need. This is the bias binding tape. I think you've already got some of this. You can just buy it on in the shops. So I'm just going to roughly guess by measuring out how much I need like this. And then giving myself a little bit extra just to play with. Now, to start this attaching nicely so that we've got a nice neat edge when it's all finished, the first thing you need to do is to open up your bias binding tape, fold back a little bit so that you've got your wrong sides together, and then place that along the seam line, the shoulder seam line of your bodice top. This is where you're going to start stitching. Now I'm going to pin so that I've got my raw edges of the bias tape against the raw edges of the neckline of the top and the right sides together. I'm just going to put one pin there to start with. Now if you wanted to, you could pin all the way around here like this. But I find that makes life a lot harder for yourself. So what I'm going to do is just, as I'm going around, I'm just going to sew it bit by bit, going around in the corner. The edge when it's all finished, first thing you need to do is so I've got my little bodice top here with the bias binding, with the seam matching with the folded back bit of the tape. I'm just going to lie it down flat now. And I'm going to have my raw edges even again, bias binding with the raw edges of the neckline. And the first thing I want to do is stitch into the little crease that's been folded into the tape. Oops, that's it. So the first thing is get the needle in, do a little back tack. I've got my stitch length on about 2.5 to 3 again, and a straight stitch. So I kind of want to not pull, I kind of want to ease this bit on so that this bit can be a little bit gathered onto the top and this bit, the outside edge, pulled round a bit more so that it lies flatter at the end. So here we go. Back tack. Just matching it bit by bit as you go around. Sorry about the horrible colours I've got going on here. It's the only bias binding I had at home, unfortunately. But at least you can see it, I imagine. Be nice when you get to the shoulder seams to check that your seam allowances are lying flat on both sides as well. So this isn't the only way of doing bias binding. There's lots of other ways. You can sew it. You can sew it all in one go, fold it over if you want to. But I think this is the easiest way. But you know, you don't have to agree. You can find a better way if you like. So this bit now, what we're going to do is just going to carry on. And as we get to this part where we started, to check that that's folded over nicely, and then okay, back tack, and then take it out from the machine. Now I've got this bit just going over the top, like that. And I'm just going to cut off this excess bit, we don't need that anymore. Once you've got your bias binding sewn around for the first time, you've got a little bit of a decision to make. You might find that you need to trim down your seam allowances, or you might need to cut some little clips into the curves. Because this is quite a big wide piece of bias binding, by the time I folded it in half and pressed it, I want it to be just over that top row, that row of stitching that I've just sewn. So actually I might just trim a little bit off this seam allowance here, but if you had a finer, a narrower bias binding, you might want to trim off a little bit more than that. I've given it a little trim all the way around, and now I'm going to fold the bias binding tape so that it's just going beyond that row of stitching, and then I'll press it, and then we're going to stitch it in place. All pressed nicely in place. Now you've got a choice again of how you want to stitch the other side of the bias binding. You can do a hand slip stitch all the way around the edge, or you can stitch along there, along the edge stitch it and catch the other side, or if you really feel a bit fancy, you can stitch in the ditch, which would mean you're stitching right in that seam there and hoping to catch the tape on the back at the same time. To stitch this on the machine, I'm going to sew from the good side, the side that's going to be visible. And to do an edge stitch, you want to get your foot so that the needle is going to be going in just close to the edge there. You're going to be feeling with your thumb underneath to check that the underside of the bias binding is further than the top part. In that way you're going to be sure to catch it. Sure-ish. Okay, same again. I'm going to do this on a 3 because in case I need to unpick it and show you again. Back tack. Just pulling it apart a bit as I'm going, feeling with my thumb underneath. Okay, looking all right so far. Obviously as well, if you don't sew in a contrast thread like I am, it won't be as visible if you go a little bit wobbly here and there. Okay, so for this part, this is the front I think, or whatever it is, I'm going to attempt to stitch in the ditch, see what happens. So if you're stitching in the ditch, you really need to get your needle right along that edge there. Stitch like that. Have I done it? No, I've missed it. I needed to fold it more. It's all in the prep. There you go, I've got it now. Go back to the end, back tack. Take it out. So there you go. There's the front, it's done with an edge stitch, and then the back, actually it has worked. It's stitched in the ditch, and then on the other side you can see that it has caught the other side of the bias tape. Hooray! Good luck!